I started the Telos Bound YouTube channel during the first month of my last year of high school when I realized, oh crap, I need to figure out what I want to do with my life. The thing is, I already knew what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a philosopher.
Why?
I love philosophy, and through philosophy, I was brought to Orthodox Christianity, and I've now realized that my love for philosophy is matched or even surpassed by my love for theology. So videos on theology and the biblical Christian worldview will now be primary on this channel. However, I won't just stop making videos on philosophy. The focus of my own personal thought has shifted from pure philosophy to reading philosophy theologically, and I want my interests to be reflected in the videos I make. The name Baptizing Philosophy perfectly summarizes the way I want to engage with philosophy. Starting today, Telos Bound is about baptizing philosophy. I want to cultivate both philosophy and theology for the mutual benefit of both. It's my passion, it gives meaning to my life, and I hope to share my love for philosophy and theology with all of you.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since I've done one of these anime crossovers, so this is cool. But I've actually been sharing a lot of your work with people in my Discord. So cool. I think some people will be very much looking forward to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they might be disappointed when they see I'm not Bill.
Well, I gave him a bill fix earlier last year. So
okay.
Yeah,
cool.
Should be all good.
Cool.
I feel like this is... So for those who can't see this, there's a monitor down here where we can see ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's very distracting.
Yeah. I often am. I've done podcasts where I'm like looking down the whole time, and then I'm like, I realize that the whole time it looks like I'm just rudely looking off to the distance.
Yeah.
But it's actually just because I'm looking at the monitor, and we got the webcam.
And I can't help it. I can't help but just So we're gonna switch to anime mode, right?
Yeah.
I guess. So anyway, I really wanted to talk to you. Well, first of all, because you kind of live, about an hour plus maybe away from me, and we actually met in the kind of Orthosphere Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I didn't even know you were a YouTuber, but then when I started checking out your YouTube stuff, it was like you're part of this new generation of philosophical wizard nerds who are kind of tying philosophy into theology, right? Yeah, I see that as kind of a growing trend, and so I did want to talk to you about your path to orthodoxy because it's very unique. For me, it was like conspiracy theories first,
right? Then
perennialism, and then I read Father Seraphim's Orthodoxy and Religion in the Future, and I was like, oh yeah, I got to start going to church. For you, it's completely different. So do you want to?
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's completely different because, well, first of all, as we were talking about, I actually have been watching you for at least 4, maybe 5 years. So for a long time, like back in the Asian capitalist days, and I started off as a libertarian, and I started off on Instagram, and it was great back then. Have you ever heard of Politogram?
No, I haven't.
But you can probably understand like what it's about.
Political Instagram.
Yeah, basically. And there was a lot of there was admittedly a lot of autism there, but there was also a lot of cool people and I met my best friend who runs Telos Bound with me now. So I started off as a libertarian, and I would do debates on Instagram and stuff about libertarianism, and then I'd watch people like you and really deep into the ANCAP scene, and I was less of a reader back then and more of just a YouTube watcher. So I bought the books of what's his name? Is it Rothbard? Murray Rothbard, and those type of guys, and I would read them and stuff.
What's funny is that you can actually be a libertarian never reading any of them.
Yeah, exactly. It's not too complicated. It's not like orthodoxy where you just get deeper and deeper into it. So one of the people I was watching at the same time as you was True Dil Tom, who knows might see this. Actually, I'll send it to him. He was making videos on libertarianism back in the day, and then around the time when I discovered him, he started moving more and more towards a sort of reactionary political philosophy, and eventually he started bringing in people like Deleuze and the postmodernists, and that I wouldn't say I can't say I understood the philosophy back then. I liked to watch it and and pretend like I understood, but it definitely sparked an interest in real philosophy for me. And that's when I discovered Nietzsche and stuff.
You know what? I watched True Dil Tom for 2 years as a libertarian.
Right.
And it's like, there's something really interesting happening there, but I didn't know what it was.
Right.
So I just kept on being a libertarian. But I was telling Bill about this stuff, and he was like, explain it. I was like,
yeah, that's the thing. I could, I actually am pretty good at memorizing things and like and repeating it in that way. But once it actually gets into the substance of it and like explaining it to someone who's never heard it before, that's where it got difficult for me. So yeah, from Nietzsche, I got really deep into Nietzsche. And actually, when I started writing my book, which is called Aphasis, it started off as like an apologetic for Nietzscheanism. It was like sort of trying to develop a Nietzschean metaphysics, and then working towards like a philosophy of consciousness and stuff. But I was writing that with someone I met on Instagram, and then we just ended up separating and going our own ways. And I slowly turned away from Nietzscheanism as I discovered the work of Slavoj Žižek. Žižek was very, very influential on me because he was the first very serious philosopher, aside from Nietzsche, who I could say I truly understood. And for some reason, I felt like he almost came easy to me. And he's like one of the only philosophers who really comes easy to me in that way for some reason. I don't even know why. I think it's mostly because he is very much into the whole philosophy of subjectivity thing. And that is my whole thing. That's how I came into orthodoxy.
So that was something that you were interested prior to reading Zizek?
I wouldn't even say that, actually. Well, I guess I was, because as I was saying, I started off trying to write some sort of Nietzschean philosophy of consciousness, right? So philosophy of subjectivity from a Nietzschean perspective. And I realized that the stuff Zizek was talking about had real value. And when you go on YouTube, there's very few people who can explain that side of Zizek very well. There's lots of good stuff on his politics and his social theory and stuff on ideology. But the core of Zizek, as he himself says, is his philosophy of subjectivity and his understanding of Hegelianism and all this stuff. So frankly, I think that there's some other videos on YouTube about this, but really the only videos that really will explain exactly what he means by stuff like the subject and object that I've come across are either my videos or Zizek lectures. So that's another reason why I really got into Zizek, because I was like a big YouTube guy, and I'm still less of a reader and more of a listener, because I paint houses for a living, and then I just listen to lectures and stuff. So I was listening to hours and hours and hours of Zizek, and finally it just started to all come together. So basically from Zizek, I realized that there are certain contradictions and paradoxes in his philosophy that are much better explained by Orthodox Christianity. And honestly, I don't even remember when I first discovered Orthodoxy. It had to have been from YouTube. Actually, now that I think about it, it was probably from Jay Dyer and his videos.
Many such cases.
Many such cases. There's like 5 or 6 people at my own parish who discovered Orthodoxy through Jay. Basically, I realized that the Zizekian understanding of the subject has certain deficiencies, which, due to their very deficiencies, pointed towards orthodoxy. And that's when I started looking into orthodoxy, and I discovered someone named Seraph Hamilton, who is now a friend of mine and a very, very brilliant man, especially when it comes to biblical stuff. And I never really had a difficulty accepting the existence of God. It took me like a month or two just because of Seraphim, and he demonstrated the coherence of the Bible. And to this day, in my opinion, the most convincing argument for Christianity is the coherence of the Bible and the way Jesus fulfills all of these Old Testament threads. And not just in the sense of there's one verse in the Old Testament that is already quoted in the New Testament, and then you just, when there's some Jewish or atheist objection to it, you're just like, well, see, Jesus fulfilled this. It's more like the entire story that the Old Testament gives you is fulfilled in Christ in a very, very rich and meaningful way. So I want to become better with the Bible stuff, but that's how I became Orthodox.
Do you want to unpack the link that you saw between Zizek and orthodoxy?
Sure. This is something I've talked about before and I've talked about in videos, and I'm actually with the person who runs my channel, Nate. We're writing a book right now on it's called Anagogia. That's the working title. And There's going to be 4 chapters, and each chapter is using the works of a particular philosopher and reading them from an Orthodox perspective. And the second chapter, and also the chapter that we've basically finished, it's the only one we've really done much work on, is the Zizek chapter. So with Zizek, he understands the subject as this void of a self-relating negativity. That's the term he uses. And what he means by this is that the subject, in the sense of the I, like who you are at your core, can't be reduced to any of your subjective experiences, like your phenomenological experience. So in this sense, he's like very much contrasted with Heidegger, because for Heidegger, Dasein is this being who can never be separated from its life world, and it's always and it makes no sense to speak of a Cartesian subject for Heidegger. But for Zizek, he takes more of the Hegelian route of emphasizing negativity and saying that Heidegger misses the negativity of the subject, and that negativity is the withdrawal. And for Zizek, the subject is nothing more than a withdrawal. So it's this pure act of withdrawing from all its objective content. So it's phenomenal experience, and therefore it's nothing more than this cut in reality. So you couldn't.
So he's saying that after you strip away everything that you kind of feel you know about yourself and you're experiencing, that then you reach this.
Exactly. And in his book Hegel and a Wired Brain, he actually talks about how there could be a situation where this subject becomes fully manifested, and that is when, in the Wired Brain, or in the Singularity, or whatever, however you want to understand it, but the way Zizek understands it is your subjective experience gets merged with some sort of collective mind, or you can share it with other people, and then your own subjective experience no longer is your own, right? Because it's been lost into this collective hive mind. But what Zizek says is that even if you lose all of this objective experience, or subjective experience rather, the one thing you can't lose is the void of your own subjectivity as the I. So what will happen is this very, frankly, very scary prospect of you losing all of your thoughts and yet nonetheless remaining this individual completely stripped of all of what you previously considered to be your inner life, your life world, and you're nothing more than remaining as this void.
It almost sounds Buddhist.
It almost does, but I think the one reason why it wouldn't be Buddhist is because I think the Buddhists would want to go the route of saying that even this I is lost. Okay. Right? Yeah. And what Zizek says, that would be like the Buddhist void, and that is the void of peace, right? It's like the egoless bliss. But Zizek has this very famous quote in Less Than Nothing, where he says that there is no peace in the void, or something like that. So for him, even the void itself, the way he understands the subject at this level, the level of a pure withdrawal, well, it is like a Hegelian negation of the negation. So you start off with nothingness, right? Because consciousness for him isn't some material object. It's nothing, but that very nothingness is negated, right? So you're the nothingness of consciousness is negated, and that negation of the negation positivizes itself as the subject. So it's nothing more than a nothingness which is turned back into itself, self-reflected, to use Hegelian terminology, and then become real for itself. So I don't like to explain.
How does it do that then?
I couldn't tell you. That's the thing. I couldn't tell you. This is one of the things, like I'm less and less worried about the way people think about how smart I am and stuff. Like back in the day, like I didn't even want to ask questions like that. Like, how does that happen, right? But at some point you got to ask, well, how does something come from nothing, right? And I don't think Zizek can really explain how reality just emerges from the void. I think this is just a classic philosophical problem that all of his admittedly very genius speculations just misses, because maybe it's just a little too genius for its good, that it lacks common sense, right? So basically what I realized is that this void of self-relating negativity, this nothingness, which is a positivized nothingness of withdrawal, is synonymous with the Orthodox Christian understanding of hell. And that was the big moment for me. Reading right here, Pavel Florensky's The Pillar and Ground of the Truth. This book really, really changed the way I understood Orthodox theology and the value it could have, because it's so philosophically informed. It's he was very well read on people like Fichte and Hegel. And nonetheless, I would say, even though he has slight deviations probably from the patristic understanding of certain topics, I would say generally he was quite faithful to the Orthodox tradition. And he, in the book that we're reading right now, I literally take quotes from Florensky and just put them side by side with Zizek, and I'm like, listen to the way Florensky is describing the abyss of Gehenna, and then see the way Zizek is describing his own subject. And these are the same in every single way, and it's not just a superficial language similarity, but it's a similarity in the very structure of the way they're parsing it out. Like for Florensky, he talks about how the subject in hell has barred itself from communion with all others, right? Because it's this abyss of this withdrawal into the self, which is what St. Maximus the Confessor calls self-love, right? So through self-love, you break communion, because self-love is the opposite of love.
Yeah.
And we can understand self-love as pride, or however else you want to put it. But and there are multiple Orthodox saints who say that the essence of all sin is pride, right? So like, and that's why St. Paisios once said that the only thing God wants from you is humility, because in the same way that the essence of all sin is pride, or the failure to enter into communion, a withdrawal from God, the essence of virtue is returning back into communion with God. So Zizek's subject as this withdrawal, it's like he describes it as like separated from its empirical content. This is exactly what Florensky says. He talks about how when Christ talks about our works that we do, this is referring to our empirical self that we develop and grow over time. And true freedom is having a proper hierarchy of your empirical self, and then yourself as a free subject, and then God. And it's meant to be this hierarchy of communion. And then to fall and to sin is for your empirical self, your free self, the subject, to become lost in its own empirical content and become enslaved to the passions. Okay. Right? Yeah. So losing its freedom in that way. And I don't know if I can do justice to Florensky, everything he says. I want to do like a proper video where I write out a script for this, but basically through this becoming lost to the passions, you actually are further alienated from yourself as the image of God, and you become lost more and more in your own subjectivity, to the point where you're nothing more than this void. And Florensky talks about how, like, for him, it's like a pure I equals I. There's no possibility for encountering the other. That's what I was going to say. The subject in hell has withdrawn from all communion, and in doing so, it's no longer capable of interacting with otherness. So it's stuck in this monotony of the self same. And that for Florensky is hell. The abyss of that is hell. And Zizek himself talks about how he has this quote that I love, where he says, the most radically new thing is not to discover an alien, but to say, screw it, another self-consciousness, right? Like just to say, oh, there is an other out there who's just as absolute, just as singular as me. Because when you're understanding subjectivity in the self-relating way that Zizek does, there is no possibility for truly encountering the other, because you're trapped in your own self-relation, right? Okay. So the way Zizek understands this being trapped in your own self-relation and your own autonomy, basically, is structurally identical to the way that people like Pavel Florensky and Dimitris Staniloy as well talk about the subject in hell. So that connection between Zizek's subject and Gehenna, the way it's been parsed out, notably in the works of Florensky, Staniloy, and C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce, that really helped me connect the way these two seemingly completely different traditions.
Well, in Zizek's philosophy, then, how would he say that you could genuinely encounter an other?
I don't think he believes you can.
Oh, okay.
And this is something I don't think he ever really accounted for, and I tried to account for it in Aphasis. There's this. And for anyone watching, if you want to not buy the book but hear about this, Chad Haig on his channel did a overview of it where he actually explains it like a lecture. So you can check that out. If I'm sure at face value it probably won't make that much sense, but basically the way he understands the subject is, of course, as a self-relation. And because of this, it's sort of like an absolute singularity that has to be more universal than any other particulars it encounters. And in order for these particulars to be encountered, they have to be brought within the universality of the subject, right? So they have to be in some way diminished in their own singularness, because two universalities can exist at the same time for Zizek. But of course, within an ontology of communion, two singularities can exist at the same time. In fact, in God, three singularities exist mutually interior to one another. So I don't know if he ever talks about this explicitly, but the way I interpreted Zizek and the way I sort of tried to develop his concepts in Aphasis, I came up with this term, perspectable hierarchy. And the idea is that from your perspective as a subject, you have to be the highest point within a hierarchy, and there's no content to what you actually think you are better. So it's not like you encounter others and it's just like in a very vulgar narcissistic sense, you're like, oh, I'm better than these people, but it's your very experience of yourself has to be more universal than the others that you encounter. So you necessarily, as a structural feature of experiencing other subjectivities, you have to undermine them and delegitimize them in some sense to make them less absolute or singular than they actually are. So very briefly, actually, in Aphasis, the main idea that I came to is that the subject is, there are three impossibilities of subjectivity. And the first is the impossibility of self-knowledge. And I think this one's pretty easy to grasp because if you are a subject, say I'm a subject viewing reality, in order to see myself, I would have to jump behind myself to see myself, right?
Right.
It's like an eyeball trying to see itself. But that within a self-relating conception of subjectivity, that's impossible. So that would be the first impossibility of subjectivity.
I think someone like Bill might say, but who could know me better than myself?
Right. And that's I think that's true in a sense, and I actually do think that's true within this conception because even if no one else can know you more, that doesn't mean you know yourself, right? Because like, or even if no one can know you more, that doesn't mean you know yourself. So I think that is probably what Zizek would say. He would just say that this point of the subject, this cut in reality, no one knows, right? It's just this eternally lost object. That's what he actually equates the Lacanian object A, which is the lost object of desire, with the subject itself. Because for Lacan, you're always looking for an object that's never there. This is the lacking object, which is object A, and that's why desire can never be fulfilled, because what you're searching for is never actually there. And for Zizek, the subject is the object of desire because we're always trying to find ourselves, but we can never find ourselves. And actually, the nihilistic reality for Zizek, and I maintain that he is a nihilist, is that you can never find yourself because you aren't actually there. You're nothing more than this sort of positing of a negativity, a positing of a positivization of nothingness. So what you were saying with how you know yourself more than others, that could be true in a certain extent, but I don't think for Zizek it applies to the void of the subject. And then when it comes to knowing others, that would be the second impossibility of subjectivity, which is the impossibility of intersubjectivity, which, as I've already discussed, because the subject is barred from the other as this self-withdrawal, it can never actually commune with the other. So that is the second impossibility, which is the impossibility of intersubjectivity. And then the third is the impossibility of absolute knowing, or just the impossibility of reconciling with yourself and just becoming what you are. And by that, I mean, in every single day you wake up and you're something different and you've negated what you were before. And this was a tricky one for me because I'm like, isn't this creativity of becoming a newer self part of the beauty of life and the joy of life? So would it be something good? Like we could say that it would be probably a good thing to know yourself, right? And a good thing to know others and commune with others, but would it be good to just stop developing?
And someone could also say that that whole timeline of you constantly changing is you.
Right. And that's the thing. That's another thing I wanted to get at because, and yeah, I'll do that in a second. That's a great point. Basically, well, now that I've laid them all out, something I realized when I was nearing the end of the book is that, okay, we have three impossibility of subjectivity, the impossibility of self-knowledge, the impossibility of intersubjectivity, and the impossibility of absolute knowing. But isn't it true that at the same time, the three essential elements of being a subject is self-consciousness, knowing yourself, consciousness of others, and so intersubjectivity, and then maintaining an identity over time. So it's almost as if the subject cannot be what it truly is. And that's where I started to make the connection between the conception of subjectivity and the fall. So because the fall is like a fall into not being able to be what you truly are, which is being in the likeness of God, which is being in communion with God and other people. So there is, of course, an identity over time, but at the same time, there's this negativity which breaks us from what we were before. And I've come to the conclusion as an Orthodox Christian now, with working within the Orthodox Christian theological tradition, that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is a good thing, actually. Development is good, but there is a time when we will find rest in what we are. And that rest is nonetheless a sort of antinomic unity of rest and movement, which the Church Fathers, or specifically Maximus the Confessor, calls the ever-moving rest. So it's a perfect communion with others that solidifies yourself as what you are, so you've attained what you desire, but nonetheless, because God is not only infinite, but beyond infinity, he keeps giving to you, and you can continuously move deeper and deeper into the life of God for all eternity. So it's sort of a movement that is not powered by lack, so it's therefore not desire. And basically what I realized when I realized that the subject, what I was basically describing was a fallen subject, I started making the connection between Christianity. And it wasn't until I discovered the works of Demetrius Staniloy that it all came together, when he started talking about the subjectivity of God and the way God knows himself. And the key component that I was missing the whole time was understanding communion and the ontology of communion, because when you try and think within a self-relating conception of reality, you can never make sense of these. Everything remains a paradox, and you run into contradictions because you're trying to describe something that isn't actually real. Reality is communal, and any self-relation is just is sin, and sin is a parasite on what is always already good, because it is created by God.
I think you also mentioned in one of your recent videos about, or it might have been Nate who did a video where the self kind of just spirals downward into his own imagination. And you talked about how that is hell.
I would say that part of what it means to be saved, and part of theosis, is entering back into objective reality. Seraph Hamilton has a video called When the World Wakes Up, and I think it's based a lot on something C.S. Lewis once wrote, which is about how we live in a dream world. And the reason we live in a dream world is because existence is communion with God. That is what existence is. And non-existence is being out of communion with God. So to be completely out of communion with God means to be nothing, would be to return to nothingness. But as we teach in Orthodox Christianity, God will never create something that will ultimately return to nothingness. So there will never be a point when we could destroy ourselves, but we can basically get to the point where we are nothing more than a turning away from God. So this will only occur in the eschaton. Like, no one is in hell yet, in the sense of Gehenna, the lake of fire. But the way we understand the lake of fire is the presence of God. The divine energies of God is the glory of the saints. It's the torment of the wicked. And the way we can understand this, and the hell was a problem that, it was really one of the big things that I couldn't really wrap my mind around before I started reading the Orthodox theologians on this topic. But one way that's helped me to understand this is by taking concrete examples from our lives and then just taking it to its logical conclusion, and it always ends in hell. So, for example, concrete examples of sin. You can imagine someone who does something evil, or they harm another person, and in order to enter back into a state back into a relationship with that person, they need to apologize. But due to their own pride, they can never do so, right? Or out of shame, maybe, they can never do so. So they can never make that step to move back into a relationship with them. And likely, or less likely, but often it's the case that the more time goes on, the more and more resentment, the more pride, the more shame and embarrassment, it brews and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, to the point where you're never able to enter back into a relationship with that person. And also consider the case of, so that's one example of how sin and a prideful stubbornness of not repenting of your sin can bar you from communion.
Yeah, I can imagine kind of something like a husband hiding something from their wife.
Exactly.
They could never, the longer they drag that on, the more the relationship wears out, to the point where it can't be repaired.
Right. And there's also cases in that psychologists have noted, where people can't even confront that they did what they did in their own minds, right? Yeah. And to encounter that is like a traumatic experience for them. Yeah.
And hence then they kind of build a layer of imaginary happenings over it.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's the same principle here. Another thing you can think about as an example is people who are proven wrong in an argument, say, and I've experienced this before in online arguments. You're proven wrong, and there's just a stubborn fury at being wrong and anger at being proven wrong, right? And basically, I think the essence of hell is a stubborn insistence on the primordial sin of man, which is attempting to become a god without God. So attempting to become this absolute singular entity with life and creativity without communion with he who gives all of that as a gift, right? And rejecting that gift. And it's a nonsensical reality that it's a withdrawal from reality as such. And that's why it's like subjective. That's why it's imaginary. So if you want to understand hell as like imaginary, well, all it is, in my view, is the imaginary conception of yourself as a self-relating entity, as a self-autonomous being who has no need of being in communion with God, has no need of others. And eventually, once you reach the point of being directly in the face of God, that is the moment where you enter into eternity. I've talked about this in other videos, and it's all based on the work of Dimitris Staniloae, his essay Eternity and Time, where he talks about how time is the interval of waiting between acts of love. So in the case of a cosmic view, the time between us being reunited with God in the eschaton, that is time, like that interval of waiting. And then once we're united fully with God, we've reached eternity, because time is movement, right? And that relationship between time and movement has gone all the way back to like Plato and Aristotle. And time is movement, this
morning you also wrote something on Discord where it was like time is the incompleteness of eternity.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, because eternity is full communion. Yeah. Because in God is eternal, because there is no interval of waiting between the relationship, the movement of the Father to the Son through the Spirit, right? It occurs instantaneously. And that fullness of mutual interiority is eternity in Orthodox theology. So eternity isn't just a long time, right? Yeah, or infinite time. It's the fullness of mutual interiority. Hell is eternal because in the same way time is fulfilled in perfect communion with God, because there is no distance between the lover and the beloved. Hell is eternal because there is no more movement, because there's been a complete separation from the other, right? So there's no more movement upwards out of oneself, but you're just stuck in a repetition of your own subjectivity.
There's nowhere to move to.
Exactly.
You're not moving towards any.
There's nowhere to move to.
Other. Yeah.
And so to understand the torment of hell, there's two sides of hell which are seemingly antinomic or paradoxical, but they work together really well, specifically within a communal ontology. You have the side of darkness and isolation, which is spoken about in scripture, but you also have the side of fire and like a blinding light. So how do we fit these two together? Well, I think that the darkness signifying this turn inwards, right? But then the light is representing symbolically the energies of God, which in the eschaton will be fully, in every single particle of the world, God will be energizing to the fullest extent possible. So there'll be a perfect mutual interiority between man and God. And remember that the presence of God is simultaneously a judgment, because God reveals everything about yourself to yourself, right? God is that light. Paul says, by thy light we see light. So imagine someone, take the case of that husband who's cheating on his wife, and perhaps he's even suppressed that into his subconscious. He never thinks about it on a day-to-day basis. But what about when God comes and he reveals all of that to you? And when you realize that the condition of entering into communion with him is to recognize what you have done. So recognize your sin and then repent. And then that moment of recognition is taking responsibility for your sin. And then the repentance is that act of cutting it off, right? So it's the same idea as in baptism. We are submerged beneath the waters, and then we arise as reborn in Christ. There's a cutting off of the old man, and we are reborn in Christ as the new man. So the torments of hell, I think, is basically a torment by truth. So in the same way that, to wrap this all up with the imaginary, you have this imagination of yourself as this self-autonomous God unto yourself. And then in the eschaton, though, and after death, when you are before the judgment seat
And
of
another
Christ.
thing about the imagination is that you could justify anything in your own head. So you
Right.
can kind of become your own judge.
Exactly. And the thing is, though, there in hell, the torment, I think, is that you're not even given the ability to play out an imagination, because immediately in the face of God, God is proving you wrong.
Oh.
So it's like, so imagine you're like, you're in a debate and you just keep like furiously trying to put this point forward, and then you're just debunked time and time
Destroyed by
again.
facts and logic.
Exactly, right. So like that is like the experience of hell, because you're fully in the face of God who's revealing the truth to you, but your mode of existence, your activities, your energies have been turned away from the truth, and you're attempting to construct this phantasmagorial reality, this imaginative reality, which doesn't actually exist. In our existence in time, because of God's mercy, he's given us the time to repent. And I think this is part of theosis, is entering back into objective reality, so leaving behind our vain imaginations. But if you use your life to act in a non-communal way, in a sinful way, you're actually becoming deeper and deeper immersed within this imaginary reality, so that at the point of your death, your will become fixed in this sin, in your imagination. Yet God will completely destroy it. And yet nonetheless, due to this inability, this prideful inability, and I think that's the essence of it, it's pride. Like a universalist will argue, well, if God's revealing the truth to you, why wouldn't you accept it? Well, look around you, right? People are revealed the truth to them all the time. Nonetheless, out of the passions, they continue to stubbornly insist on it. So I think hell is this void of, it's not merely imagination. So it's not merely the darkness of your own self-isolation, nor is it just God, this wrathful God, throwing fire at you. It's a unity, a very strange unity of withdrawal and fixation upon something that is false, which is self-relation, while God is fully making himself present to you. And that creates this experience of torment where you're literally split into two. So just the death of the body is splitting of the soul from the body. I think the experience of the second death, which is hell, is the splitting of the soul from itself.
Fascinating stuff. I was also wondering how many other people at church or other Orthodox people you talk to about this kind of stuff, and what kind of reactions have you been getting?
I usually don't, well, as you can see, I tend to dominate conversations with just going down on rabbit holes, but so I don't talk too much about this stuff with my friends at church, but we do talk sometimes about this stuff, like at coffee hour and stuff. I have a lot of friends at St. Herman's, and it's great. Yeah, we usually talk about maybe more political stuff or stuff like that, but we do talk about theology. Have
you talked to Father Lawrence about it?
I haven't yet, but I'm gonna send him. I published a thesis before I was really in the church, so I didn't really have any guidance for that, but I'm going to talk with Father Lawrence about this stuff, and I'm going to send him everything. Like, if you have time, just if you could read it over and give whatever feedback you have. And also there's a new priest at my parish named Father Simeon, and he's helped look over some of my video scripts. And I'm going to definitely, he's like well read on Zizek and philosophers and like everyone, Singularity, everyone. So I'm going to see if he can help out with this stuff too. And I think that's very important when talking about theology, to have an actual to do it within a communal context, right? So I'm writing a book largely based on the communal ontology, so I want to make it more of a communal experience. Actually, in the Discord, I added you to a private channel where I sent the first first chapter
I've read part of it, actually.
Cool. Thank you.
Do you want to switch chairs?
I'm good.
Okay. Yeah. Because you had some questions for me, right? So I was thinking.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Let's switch.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hopefully I was close enough to the mic this whole time, but I think we're good. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a bit about your history. Specifically, I think we were talking about this earlier. I was in the libertarian scene, and so were you for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've known you for so long. When I mentioned to a few of my friends that I was going to do this, they were like, "Oh, I know these guys. Like, I watched these guys before." Because you guys, did you guys even have more subs before? Because
yeah, we've been losing subs for about 2 years now, steadily.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But I was just wondering, like, what exactly, well, I guess originally, why did you become interested in libertarianism and stuff? And what did you find appealing in the more neo-reactionary political philosophies? And also just like, I don't know how deep you were into the actual like philosophy stuff, that stuff like Dylan was doing with Deleuze and Derrida and stuff. So I was just wondering like what sort of limitations did you see with libertarianism that drew you to reactionary stuff, and then I guess ultimately led you to orthodoxy?
Yeah, I always go back to the same anecdote actually. So well, I first got interested in libertarianism through crypto actually.
Okay.
And I was meeting a lot of crypto people in Vancouver, and there's this scene happening, right? Everybody was very excited about decentralization and that kind of thing, and and then the culture war came around. Bill got me interested in that. The first kind of new right video that I ever watched was Milo Yiannopoulos on Dave Rubin.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You know, I had never heard any of these talking points. I never seen someone present right-wing stuff so flamboyantly, and so I just got hooked. And then it was like Sargon of Akkad, Andy Worski, all of these exciting new channels were popping up. Naked Ape. I actually model a lot of what I do on YouTube after Naked Ape's visual style.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you know Naked Ape.
I don't think.
Okay,
I do.
yeah, that was early 2015.
Okay.
So I just wanted to kind of chime in, right? And I wanted to. There's an energy about it. Yeah, and I got really interested. The point where I began turning away from libertarianism, I think a lot of different things were converging in my life at the time. So I was getting married. I was kind of growing up, becoming an adult, and becoming more responsible, I guess, and kind of thinking ahead of what the world is going to look like in a few years, what kind of world I'm going to bring kids up in. And then there was one very sharp turning point, which was in the summer of about 2017, it might have been 2016, 2017, when Belle Delphine was selling her bathwater. And it was at this moment where I became extremely kind of conflicted, or at least I saw something wrong here, because here was this girl being a good capitalist, you know, serving the market demand.
Right.
And at the same time, from the libertarian viewpoint, there was no way I could really critique that. But internally, I felt like this was a trend that I had been seeing all throughout high school, like girls behaving in this way. And then it just got worse from there. It went to OnlyFans. It went to all this other kind of like sugar baby, sugar daddy type of stuff. Have you seen that?
Right. Yeah.
And you know, all of this was going on, and I knew that it was wrong, but I didn't have a philosophy that could critique that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had mentioned that I've been watching True Dil Tom for about 2 years. And another libertarian who was entering kind of the popular conversation was Hans Hermann Hoppe, right?
Right. Of course.
Physical
removal.
Yeah, exactly. So these guys are talking about this moral dimension that libertarianism just kind of brushes aside. Right. And I was like, yeah, something is going on here, and it's time to like kind of really give consideration to what these guys are talking about. And then I don't know how I found Evola actually, but I think it might have been through True Dil Tom as well.
Yeah, that's how I found it.
Yeah, so it was looking into Evola and then Ganon and you know, the perennialists. And I got really interested in perennialism right after getting interested in monarchy. And
then after that, you became Orthodox.
Yeah.
Before you go to that, I was just wondering, like, you've obviously stopped posting on your channel as much. And to me, there's just a feeling from 2015 to 2020, right? Where it was like, there was something there was some energy. And even by 2020, it just kind of seemed to be just lowering. And I just remember some of the most entertaining times of my life was just listening to some Killstream debate, right? And it was so fun. And then just seeing all of these response videos to other people, and you're agreeing with basically everything. And then and then stuff just becomes more and more extreme, and you're hearing about new ideas and stuff. And I mean, I have a nostalgia, and you made a video on this with Bill about like this nostalgia. And I have like a deep nostalgia of these times. And so I was just wondering, when do you think this historical moment sort of ended? Because to me, at least personally, it was when Trump lost again.
Yeah, I think so too, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, right around there. Oh, and even actually when Trump lost, people still thought that he was going to, cross the Rubicon. And so there was still
I was deep into that.
Yeah.
I was embarrassingly deep into that. Watching like waiting for Rudy Giuliani's like updates. Yeah. Right. That was me.
Yeah. And I think even Steve Bannon was hinting, okay, like watch, keep your eyes peeled, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was kind of right after that. A lot of people ended up going towards Neoreaction, right? So there was this big split for a while between Neoreaction, libertarianism, and the alt-right. And so, communities kind of fractured.
Yep.
I remember also there was a time when the honk pill was a really popular meme.
Yes.
And the honk pill was this kind of cope that, we're going to lose, but, let's laugh our way to the end of the world, right?
But it's like with you, like you have a family.
Yeah.
Like that's what I realized too. Like I don't ultimately want, like accelerationism was never appealing to me because I maybe like for some like autistic seconds, I was like, oh yeah. And then I remember stuff like my family and my responsibilities in life. Like ultimately, like as Orthodox Christians, we're not political ideologues. We want to, and we can be like this because we know that in the end, everything will be all right. Right. And like we are living, in the world, but we're not of the world. Right.
Yeah. And actually, Jonathan Pageau was another big influence on me.
Right.
When he did the series on 666,
I've seen that. Love it.
He was describing all of these things in the book of Revelation, but how the pattern is also happening right now. That totally got me in this mindset that, whoa, Christianity is right.
Yeah.
And about having a family, that's the other thing. It's that you recently did this video on Norm Macdonald about cynicism.
Yeah.
And that was the other thing that I was really trying to get away from as well, which is that I found in these online communities, this kind of,
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. How would you describe it? It's like, so every Discord community kind of has a resident autist.
Yeah.
and I'm pretty good friends with the resident autist in our community, but he does have this way of trying to get everybody to see all the bad in the world. Yeah. So, he's a single guy. He talks about dating quite a lot. And he always goes to this place where it's like, I got to play these mind games with these girls. Otherwise, there's no way, I can win, right?
Like Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, like, personally, like, when I began my relationship with my girlfriend now, like, I kind of had that mentality a little. It wasn't, like, very bad, but, like, it never worked out. If you find a self-respecting woman, Andrew Tate ideology is not going to work. Maybe it might work to originally catch their attention, but even then, it's better just to be upfront with your intentions and be like a responsible human being, and therefore you're going to attract another responsible human being.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because PUAs, they have all of these, terms. I don't even know what the term. I can't remember any of the terms, but it's like, oh, in this situation, you got to do X, you got to follow the playbook, and it's all this cynicism.
Yeah, I think part of the cynicism is also a sort of obsession with being the most intellectual. And I very much saw this in like the whole neo-reactionary thing. I mean, not to give too much personal information away, but Dylan himself has said he was falling into this type of thing. And I mean, I was as well. Like, I just have the privilege of not having put out a bunch of online content over it. And there was always this idea of, if you can have this new idea that someone else doesn't yet, and then it never just came with like a genuine curiosity for the idea. It always had this like, I am presenting something new and it's good because it's new and you don't understand. And because of that, I'm better than you. And like, you can't even debate. And that was a really, really big thing in the neo-reactionary community.
It's your opportunity to call everybody else a midwit.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that part of the cynicism is just, I think it's a bigger attitude of not, from an Orthodox perspective, actually, it's not true communion. And with my baptizing philosophy podcast and stuff, I don't want to have people on there just to try and win debates. And that doesn't mean that's not valuable in the right context. But I think that what we're missing a lot of is the recognition that other people are fundamentally other people. And usually people, I think, have pretty decent motives. And what makes people have bad motives is a general cynical attitude where you, like, for example, when I would like ask a question which was seemingly very basic, but I was wondering, right? And people would just be just on your ass about it and like making fun of you and all this stuff and just making you not want to participate in the dialogue. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest issues with the online sphere. And
the Orthodox sphere is not immune to that.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm making my server. I want to make it different than that because I do understand some of the stuff about being more strict and more like a heresy fighter. There is a need for that in certain contexts, but I've always wanted Telos Band to be more about open discussion and open dialogue.
Yeah.
And actually, I have the letters of Saint Sophrony and Father Florovsky on my bookshelf. I bought it for like $70, but definitely worth it. And Sophrony talks about how as Orthodox, we should not be afraid of engaging with dialogue with other people, because if we truly have the faith, it's an unshakable rock and so we should approach others without fear. And obviously, like, he was talking to a world-renowned theologian here. I wouldn't suggest this to someone new to Orthodoxy, right? Or someone struggling with Orthodoxy. But even me, when I was a catechumen, becoming baptized doesn't magically make you either better at talking. It doesn't, if you were bad at teaching as a catechumen, you're going to be baptized and you're still going to be bad, right? Like, to me, I think that I have... Like,
you don't instantly get the phronema, right?
No, exactly, dunked, right? Exactly. And like in terms of just regurgitating theology or thinking strictly philosophy and theology, I think I have like a talent at doing that, but I would never give advice for spiritual stuff. But even as a catechumen, I think I had a decent ability to convey ideas. So that's what I've basically always wanted to do, and that's why, like, I'm never going to limit comments, or people can comment whatever they want and critique me. I encourage people to critique me, and I've learned a lot from people in this way. So I never want to be seen as some sort of guru, or as someone who is like even with like the communal ontology stuff. Like, I am one of the first YouTubers that I know who's really taking a name for it and like putting the ideas like straightforward, like, and showing where it disagrees with other philosophies and stuff. And yet I don't want to be the communal ontology guy, so that there's going to be a new trend right after, like in the same way after libertarianism there was Neoreaction. Like, I don't want that to I don't want it to be like that. I want this to be a dialogue,
part of a conversation,
right? Yeah. That can extend ultimately into eternity, because we're trying to grasp what is objectively true. And something that Hegel talks about is like, what is true does not pass away, right? So like, even if there are limitations now, I believe the kernel of what Orthodoxy has and what I present, because I'm just presenting Orthodox theology as I understand it, I think that this kernel is true. It's a solid objective foundation. And then the point now is just to grow it out. And there will be, you make mistakes all the time, but I mean, that's just ultimately it's part of the process.
By the way, did you ever watch Dil Tom's podcast that he did with Jockle?
Yes, I did.
What was it called again?
I am blanking on that.
Yeah. I felt like when he kind of changed tones when he started working with Jockle, they were talking about a lot of things like loving your neighbor type of stuff, right? And loving your enemies,
right? And
that was also what inspired me to kind of take a hard look at where the online right community was and where it could be.
Well, one example of an online community which I think was quite toxic was and I'm sure you remember the why am I blanking on it? Well, the Curt Doolittle group.
Oh,
what were they called? The
Propertarians,
right?
Yeah.
Did you ever have any contact with these people? Were you ever interested in it at all?
I wasn't too interested. I was interested. Well, John Mark was the kind of the spokesperson
who disappeared after the meetup.
Suspected Fed. But I thought he did some pretty nice videos. They were fun to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately I did kind of see it as Fed posting. I mean, John Mark was basically Fed posting.
Yeah.
So
I mean, like Curt, he would give advice for how to overthrow the American government with like telling people how to make Molotov cocktails and stuff. And yet he was still flying around. Like, I heard he had like a house in like some European country and like no internet censorship at all. Right. Yeah. So it was always sketchy to me. I always also found this is probably a time when my intellectual ego was handy for me, because I always found Curt Doolittle like annoying. Like I never like,
I did.
Like he was always like, yeah.
Another problem that I had with it was also that it was an attempt to like systematize things even more. Or it was basically the Jewish Torah or something, right? Like 6,000 ruls
exactly
in the book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, because one thing I've mentioned, and I was kind of trying to convey it in the Norm Macdonald video, was about how abstract theories can be as sophisticated as you want, but there is something about the immediacy of a personal relationship with someone that transcends any philosophy. And one thing I've even started to kind of think about, it's very difficult, but like even stuff like there are always philosophers who had, and Zizek kind of helped me see this. There's like a aspect of their personal life which somehow is not, cannot be captured in the philosophy itself. Like Zizek has this hatred of seeing himself because he's like very ashamed of the way he looks and stuff. It's like this element of the personal, like stuff like shame, but also like love. These realities which seem to not be philosophical concepts necessarily, they can be philosophized, but I think the philosophy always misses it. There's something about the immediacy of once you're in it, there's something so absolute about something like love and a personal relationship with someone you love, or that feeling of embarrassment that we've all felt, that just a philosophy can't capture it. You can't explain it. It's just irreducible to any abstraction. And I think that Orthodox theology very much accounts for this. And all of this theology, like when we're talking about mutual interior, like I think we're at the point where when we're talking about mutual interiority, we can explain it philosophically, right? Like the Father is fully in the Son and the Son is fully in the Father through the Spirit, and we're meant to be fully in God and God will be fully in us.
And the instant reciprocation
exactly.
and all that.
And you can explain it. It's very, very powerful theological framework, but at the same time, you won't get it until you've done it.
Yeah.
Right.
I also think of it, another analogy that I like to use sometimes is beauty. Some people like to technicize beauty. So it's like the eyes need to be this far apart, the face needs to be, and my face is very asymmetrical, especially on camera at this angle. But and then you can describe all the scientific measurements and golden ratios, but that doesn't, the other person that you're explaining it to, that's not how they experience beauty. And then if you explain to a person who doesn't know what beauty is, they won't get it.
Exactly.
They won't know. You don't get an understanding of beauty from all the technical details.
Yeah. Well, moving on from that, I did want to talk about your conversion to Orthodoxy a little bit more. So how long have you been a catechumen, by the way?
Yeah, I've been a catechumen since January of last year. So it's a little over a year now.
Yeah, right. I'm guessing, well, were you an atheist before?
I was doing the perennialist thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And I was an agnostic prior to that. So
right.
I've always kind of been very open to.
So in terms of perennialism, was it like you believe in God and you believe that God makes himself present in all these different traditions? And
At first, it's a belief. I had a belief in an impersonal God, like the universe trying to know itself kind of concept. Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then I was following, there's this guy on YouTube, J-Dye refers to him as Boomerpod. Can't remember what his channel is, but it's like Dharma Nation or something.
Okay.
But my mom was Buddhist. And so I tried to kind of go down that route and retrace, something that I had connection to. And then I started reading and watching a lot of channels about Dharma, right? The universal law.
By the way, did you ever read Evola's book on Buddhism?
I didn't read that one.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, I was just wondering because I was considering Buddhism as well. And I read that book.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's interesting. And I never really got it. And I never felt anything with Buddhism. So I never really pursued it. But
yeah, there's definitely an aspect to something that's beyond the intellect, right? Like you can be intellectually very stimulated by certain philosophies.
Exactly.
But then Orthodoxy is like the first encounter with religion that I've had there where it's like, it's more than just the intellect. It is the intellect as well, but it's like, it's so much more than that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really interested in Dharma, and I was even doing meditations and things like that.
Okay.
And then I read Father Seraphim's Orthodoxy and Religion in the Future, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's something sus going on here.
Yeah.
And I had intentions on visiting an Orthodox church for quite a long time before I actually stepped foot in one.
Right. So I think the perennialism thing, I think perennialism is like a good stepping stone to Orthodoxy, because Orthodoxy, there's a big emphasis on, what's the term? Logos spermaticos.
Yeah.
So like the universality of Orthodoxy and the fact that these other traditions, and even with Zizek, right? Like I've discovered Zizek and it's like there is truth in Zizek, but it's so far from the truth that it corresponds with the fullest deviation from the Christian ideal, right? Like, so like it's a weird sense in which there is a universality to Christianity, which perennialism,
and maybe in some ways that also shows the power of the human imagination, where they can grasp a part of the truth, but then they can kind of twist it in their own head towards this other completely opposite direction.
Right. Yeah, because I think that, I mean, the essence of the fall was you have like this immediacy of a relationship between God and then man and wife, Adam and Eve. And I think that the fall was literally a shattering of reality into these different pieces. And fundamentally what those pieces are is the subjects themselves divided from each other, right? And then you create your different perceptions of reality in your own ideologies and stuff like that. And like, this is exactly what Nietzsche talks about. So like, you can go from different philosopher to different philosopher, especially when you're talking about the fall, because modern philosophers are so good at explicating a structure of the fall without knowing it. Like with Nietzsche, when he talks about perspectivism, how there is no one truth because there's only these different competing perspectives and they all have a will to power and stuff. And it's like, that's false, but it's false in an oddly true way. And this is something that I realize is that with Christianity, error isn't just error. Being false isn't just false, but it always has a spiritual component to it, so that the error of perspectivism can manifest at a spiritual level with the division between people, right? In this competition of different perspectives competing out for who's going to dominate, right? There's a weird universality to Christianity with heresy and stuff. Secular people would look at our strict stance against heresy as like just a weird arbitrary hatred of ideas. But something that Florensky talks
Dogmatism.
about. Exactly, right.
That is, yeah.
Right. And like, what Florensky talks about in Pillar and Ground of the Truth is he makes a great point about how Arianism, for example, is not just a belief in something, but it's a belief that manifests as a spiritual reality. So as he says, it's a failure to believe that it's possible for God to become man. And it's like, I talk about the logic of self-relation. He uses the term logic of self-identity, and how like the principle of I equals I is the principle of fallen rationality. But to truly enter into a communal understanding of reality, you need to transcend your I equals I, because reality, the I isn't constituted by just being an I. The I is constituted through communion with another, right? So
would you say I equals I plus we or something like that?
I don't know. I don't even know if it can be formulated, right?
Okay,
so I think it's more like to say I equals I plus we. We're already performing this abstraction where you have an I before the we, right? So like the I is imminently constituted by a communion with otherness. So like as Father Nikolaos Ludovicos talks about in one of his papers, he talks about how, like, we talk about the monarchy of the Father. So by this we mean that the Father is the source of the Trinity, and the Father essentially gives the essence to the Son and the Spirit. And we can misunderstand this as being like the Father has the essence fully completed in himself, and then he imposes it on the other two persons. But actually, the essence is always already constituted by the gift giving of the Father to the Son through the Spirit, so that you can't have an essence already like latently present and completed in the Father, but the perfection of the essence lies in its being shared between the three persons. So imminent to the identity of God, imminent to what God is the communion between the three persons. And I think it's the same thing with us. Imminent to what we are is communion with others, so that if we were to withdraw from communion, we would be absolutely like an absolute withdrawal from communion. We'd be absolutely separated from what we truly are, to the point where we're nothing more than this void of withdrawal from God, and that is hell. We've gone far from our original conversation about your
that was kind of where I wanted to go, though. Actually,
nice. Yeah. Okay. I actually have, before we end the conversation, I do have one more question about just going back towards the old days. I think we should wrap up sort of talking a little bit more about nostalgia, because I mean, I think a lot of people watching this probably have a nostalgia for that time, and I certainly do. And it's interesting, like you were talking about how like I'm like the young generation or whatever, but it's like literally I am the product of what you guys were doing back then, and and very much so, like in quite literal sense. And there's so many other people I think that are outside of the paradigms that you were in, so that they can be open to new stuff, such as orthodoxy. And I know you have plans for the future, and obviously there's some nostalgia from the past, but also like a necessity of surpassing the past, right? Like it's very unhealthy to be obsessed with the past. But I'm just wondering what your general take is now on hopefulness for the future and stuff, because I think that after Trump's loss, I think we really saw the explosion of nihilism. And also, like, before, it almost felt to me like it was all almost fun and games. To me, from an observer, it was like, oh, we're gonna talk about all this stuff, and oh, I got deplatformed. But then you had the case where, for example, the Jan 6 people who were arrested, right? And then you had the case with like like actual real world consequences and like people getting barred from banks and like stuff that literally was not happening to anyone except for like David Irving, like Holocaust deniers and stuff. But like at this point, it's like it's happening to like people who are in our community, right? And then there just seemed to be like this explosion, and I think that went along with like the honk pill thing. Something just became darker about that whole scene, and it's like fundamentally what our community was at that time was calling out those who were in power and had domination over culture. And I don't think until like I don't know what your views are on the or if we can even talk about like the election and stuff, like the I guess we can. We already. You
mean the suspicious part of it? Yeah.
But I think like once we saw that, and like I'm very much on the side where like obviously it was like once you saw that, when you saw what people in power will truly do, what they can do, it no longer was just a game of and like for example, like the darkness we see and like a more serious, a more real world type thing. A perfect example is like Kanye, where I don't want to say like he's lost or anything, like that's not what I mean. It's more like it's a more serious thing. It almost feels like it's no. So I was just wondering, like, what's your take on this whole almost like a turn towards a darker side of what used to be all fun and games, and what do you see for the future of the whole online political community, and also, I mean, maybe just in general for the prospects of our movement, if you can call it that.
I mean, I try to be optimistic because I do have a lot of personal relationships with a lot of people in this community, right? And there's a big, broad spectrum of how I see people's future prospects looking.
Right.
But as soon as you said fun and games, and immediately the first thing that I thought about was screenwriting, because there's this very popular screenwriting book called Save the Cat. And in it, he basically lays out the stages of a story. And so there is a stage in every story called fun and games when they get to know like the new friends that they meet along the journey. And then right after that phase, there's something called the bad guys close in. And that's kind of in a way what happened in the political world as well.
Right.
Where it's like, hey, we're not joking around right now. We're not going to be your lolcows anymore. This time we're going to actually do some serious stuff. Right. And right after that stage is actually something called the Dark Night of the Soul, where the band splits up. So the Avengers split up, Team Captain America over here and Team Iron Man over here.
Right.
And in a way, we're kind of going through that. And the way they get back together is actually, there's this note in italics. The hero realizes what he needs. So between Act 1 and Act 2, it's the hero realizes what he wants. And then between Act 2 and Act 3, it's the hero who realizes what he needs.
Right.
So maybe the realization that we're all working towards is that we know what we wanted. We wanted a based trad, covenant village,
right,
or something like that. But we have to come to the realization that, what comes prior to that, and also what is the kind of fundamental building blocks towards getting what we want. And a lot of people in my Discord have actually become catechumens in the last year as well. So it's
great.
Something amazing is really happening. Right? Yeah. And then there are other people. I mean, I met up with Bill fairly recently, and he still very much feels like this nostalgia and this the sense of like,
I remember that in your video. I think like he was like, and he was talking about how like
why can't we go back,
right? And he's like, I'm very much a person who just likes to do the same thing. He was even talking about how he eats the same like
eat the same steak every
single day.
Yeah. So there's definitely people who are still there as well, and I mean, for us, we pray for them, and we pray that things will be good for them, right? Another aspect, actually, the relational aspect, which is that, everything that you do kind of rubs off on the people that you spend a lot of time with, that you have good relationships with. Even in my last conversation with Bill, we actually talked about church and a lot of other things like, the future, family stuff. He wasn't entirely dismissive about it either. And I think this is a realization that a lot of people in our communities are coming to, is that on the one hand, we want to be able to put out a YouTube video and then influence thousands of people to change their minds.
Right.
But another way of changing people's minds that's sometimes or oftentimes more effective is just spending time with people and having the things you do rub off on them in a certain way, that you influence them indirectly or even directly. You can talk to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like Saint Seraph Hamilton once said that acquire the Holy Spirit and
thousands around you will be saved.
Yeah. I definitely agree. Like, I think that's a great way to end off. And I think the problem with the political ideologies and stuff is seeing them as absolute, when anything of this world is, you won't find the fulfillment in this world. Like you'll find it outside, and I think that's even why our communities would go through just constant cycles of new things, right? Like it was libertarianism, Neoreaction, perennialism, why do I keep forgetting it? Proprietarianism, like all this stuff. But ultimately, I think once you find orthodoxy, it's like I don't see orthodoxy as just some philosophy, nor do I see it as something that I just want to use to grow or feed my ego to make people think I'm smarter than them. Like I see something very foundational and eternal in orthodoxy that will be, and what that is, I think, and this is a crucial part, exactly what you were saying, is the ideas. I think the ideas are obviously eternal as well, but they're not self-referential in the sense that we like the ideas because we like the ideas. We like the ideas because they provide an intellectual framework for the personal experience that we have of communion with others and with God. And I think that the personal element there in cultivating virtue and love in your life between you and others, and between you and God, that is the most important, and that is really how you get outside of this. So if anyone is watching and they're struggling with this and they're just going crazy, like actually a great quote of St. Paisios, who said, I would go crazy if I didn't know that God was in charge, or something like that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So there's a piece that you will have in trusting in God. And I don't think that the argument that this is just some sort of cope holds up, because I think ultimately when you're within these political ideology, when you're obsessed with worldly things, ultimately you will end up finding some cope yourself, or you will go insane. And those are the two options, really. You won't find satisfaction in this world, but orthodoxy provides like a robust, meaningful framework for just understanding reality in your life.
Yeah, I always found that prior to orthodoxy, I always found that I was fighting with something inside of me. Like I was, for example, it's like, oh, the left, when we get in power, we should line them up against the wall and shoot them, right? And on the one hand, that kind of feels like it's a funny thing to say. Like it kind of pumps you up, right?
Yeah,
it makes you feel powerful. But at the same time, there was something about it that I was fighting, and that's the kind of the thing that drives you crazy. Is that you never feel like you're truly yourself. You always have to put on this, like you always have to pretend that you're more based, or you're more violent, or you're more barbaric.
Well, like from an orthodox perspective, like this would be your energies are your activities, right? So like if your energies are being, the fuel for your energies is a hatred for the other, like it's self-destructive ultimately. And once you destroy that other, this is something actually that like even leftists like Todd McGowan talk about it, very, very good stuff, where he's talking about how like, well, once you destroy the enemy, you lose that feeling, you lose the source of your energy. So it's literally self-destructive in the most literal sense of the word. So the answer to it is, instead of fueling your activities in the self-destructive way through hatred, it's by doing it out of love. And Saint Seraph Hamilton says in his book Acquisition of the Holy Spirit, he talks about how the worldly economic goods, the more they're passed around, the more they depreciate in value. But with the spiritual goods of God, the more they are passed around, the more there are. Yeah, the more abundant they become. Exactly. Yeah. And it's just like that is how that's how love works, and that's how communion works. So that's ultimately the way out, like love, and not in the hippie sense, but in the truly deep communal sense of that you find in orthodoxy.
Yeah. Cue the angry pagan arguments down below in the comment section. Yeah, this was a great pleasure, great honor.
Honor is mine. It's an awesome coincidence that we live so close, and I thank you for the opportunity to be on your channel. If we were to go back 4 years and tell me in grade 8 that this is what I'd be doing 4 years later, I don't think I'd believe you. But
you just told everybody your age.
I've said it before. It's okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.